Enochian is, it's not only in this particular instance that you're talking about. Jack Parsons was using Enochian back in 1945, 46, when he was doing his rituals out in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, the Enochian calls, this is like standard Golden Dawn, AA, OTO kind of, not OTO so much, but pretty much the ritual magic people. The Enochian is like the holy grail for some people, because what it is, it represents not just a magical method. There's an entire language, its own independent language that is called angelic language, or the Enochian language. Has its own alphabet, its own letters. It has its entirely own vocabulary. It has its own grammar. And back in the day when we were looking at Enochian really heavily, back in late 70s, I guess, early 80s, we were talking to people who were specialized in linguistics, and they said nobody can invent a language.
Welcome. I'm here again with Peter Levenda. Peter, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be fun, especially where we edited it the last time with the Zohar. I wasn't expecting to edit. That's the conversation I wanted to have, even though I didn't even know I wanted to have it. So, well, before we get to kind of transition, I mean, this is a smooth it's going to be a smooth transition into the next topic. But with the Zohar, given the rumors of people kind of going nuts, honestly, what's the real risk if somebody were to kind of read that book?
Well, it's like I say, a bit of hyperbole to say they'll go nuts, but there are people in my lifetime, and I've been studying this stuff, well, since the 1960s. So it's a long time. And in that amount of time, I have come across people, I've known people who went off the deep end. Not just on the Zohar. Let's not blame the Zohar. The Zohar is a fascinating text. If you look at the Daniel Matt translation, it comprises, 12, 13, 14 volumes. I mean, it's like the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh my God.
Because what he does is he goes through it very minutely and discusses everything, right? So you don't get led astray. So you can read through that and you can start to understand it. You take it on board as you're going through. And the Zohar really goes through the 5 books of the Torah, line by line, basically, trying to have, there's rabbis having conversations, right? They're walking along and they're having conversations. Why does the first word of the Bible not begin with Aleph, but with Beth? Why is it Bereshith, right? In the beginning. It should begin with Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet. How come the Bible doesn't start with A instead it starts with B? And it goes on this huge, long conversation about that, right? And it's wordplay, it's puns, it's allusions to other books, it's allusions to the Talmud, allusions to other books of the Torah. And it's plays on words and plays on numbers, because numerology is also very much a part of what's in the Zohar, right? So the idea that there is gematria, there's a numerical analysis of every single letter and word in the Bible that can be used to find other meanings, to go deeper.
Are you familiar with thesecretcipher.com?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
that works.
Yeah. Put your own name in there and you'll
see what happens.
You'll learn some interesting things.
And you go mad right there, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one place to start. Shematria is one. S-H-E, Matria, one word. It's by Bathsheba Asher, who's a very good Kabbalah scholar, Gematria scholar. And she does a lot of this very intensive work. And she set up a website where you can put in Hebrew words and words in other languages and other alphabets. And she'll show you all the various, numerical equivalences of that. Very valuable also for anybody wanting to do this. But that's kind of dilettantish stuff, right? If you're starting, Let me look up this name and see what this word means. You really don't know what those numbers mean until you get really deeply involved with the study of this. And it's Jewish Kabbalah, right? So you have to understand the beginning. It's mostly Jewish, but it's kind of a mix between rabbinical, post-Second Temple Judaism, and smatterings of old Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Akkadian stuff that gets kind of mixed in there with it. And some of the idea that we get from the Sefer Yetzirah, which is this very thin book, but it's about the development of the Sefirot, right? The 10 spheres, which then became the basis for the Golden Dawn system of initiation. So there's a lot of that in there too. What's on the right side of the tree of life? What's on the left side of the tree of life? The right and left, and then the front and the back take on very specific meanings. So it's a lot to get on board. And unless you start really, it takes years to really study this. Even if you're not studying it in Hebrew or Aramaic, you're studying it in English, it will still take years and years to get it on board, to really get to feel comfortable with it, to see the puns, to see the allusions, to understand what different sages meant when they described a particular verse a particular way. But in a way, that's a very intellectual enterprise.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Right? You sometimes are looking for something that's not just purely intellectual, but you're looking for a more visceral practice or a more visceral approach. And that becomes difficult within that context because the groups that do that are very protective of themselves. They're very protective of their religion. They are mostly Jewish Orthodox groups that would get involved in sort of the visceral practices and the other physical things that are involved with studying the Kabbalah and the Zohar in particular. So you have that to deal with. You have the Chabad people, right? That's one branch that's very involved in Kabbalah, but you pretty much have to be Jewish to be involved with that. That's why magic in the 20th century and 21st century concept kind of rose out of this idea that we want to practice this, we want to see how far we can take it, and not have to spend 30, 40 years of our lives studying the Kabbalah in its natural state, in the Zohar or in Sefer Yetzirah or something. So magic became this sort of half shamanistic, half intellectual practice that blended the both of both worlds. We're going to do rituals, but it's going to be based on Kabbalah. It's going to be based on what we learned from the Zohar, from the Sefer Yetzirah, from different other kind of Sephirim that are out there, other different books of Jewish mysticism. But we're going to combine it with some Egyptian stuff. We're going to combine it with some Greek stuff and some Roman stuff and, whatever else. We're going to see how these things, it's a bricolage, right? We're putting together little pieces and bits and pieces of different religions. Synthesis, you might say, not always very successful, but bricolage might be a little bit better way to look at it. Bricks that you're building from different sources, and you're building a different building with it. So Jewish people get very annoyed when you talk about Kabbalah because you're not Jewish, you don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic, you have no clue what they're talking about, you don't know this, you don't know the culture and all the rest of it. Yes, that's true, very much. But there are elements of Kabbalah that you can understand because they are eternal, they are universal in meaning. It's not strictly limited to a very narrow interpretation of the Torah, right? It can be the idea of creation starting from emanations from the divine. That's not only a Jewish idea, that's a Gnostic idea as well. And that's an idea that's been around in different places. So you can go back further. Even Gershom Scholem, the famous expositor of Kabbalah, the guy who made it an academic discipline, he knew that there were roots of this that were found in other cultures and other religions in that area, Mesopotamia in particular, but in other areas as well. And don't forget, the Jews, according to their story, spent a lot of time in Egypt. And Moses fought with the Egyptian magicians. So what did he
Babylon, and Babylon, the Babylonian captivity, right?
Right. So what did they pick up, right, during those times? How did that get involved and brought into Judaism? As Greco-Roman ideas got brought into Judaism around the 1st, 2nd century CE, and even earlier. So, let's not be too dogmatic about this, right?
It tends to always take you back to Sumeria and Babylon. I know there's two researchers. Are you familiar with Steve Mera and Barry Fitzgerald, British researchers?
It sounds familiar, but you'll have to give me a book title.
It's like Project Doorway. Steve Mera he's like an electrical engineer by training, so he uses a lot of scientific methods to document the phenomena.
Okay.
But he's also an experiencer. And him and Barry Fitzgerald, when they started delving a little bit deeper into Babylonian rituals and rites and demonology specifically, the phenomena got really aggressive with them. So take that what you will, right? Like really strange disturbances that they would have. And that tends to happen when researchers start barking up the wrong. I don't know. I can't even speculate. I don't know why they would.
It happens. I can tell you from personal experience, it happens. When pressed, people will say, is this happening like outside of you or inside of you? Is it like in your mind or outside of your mind? I mean, there are these questions they always ask, which is very frustrating because we don't see it that way. We don't see something. When something happens, it happens. To try to dissect it and say, but that was all in your mind, right? Well, it's all in our mind, right? Without being too stupid.
Everything we perceive is in
our mind, yeah.
Yeah,
the colors are in our mind. Everything is filtered, right? But they say, no. You know what I mean? Does it really happen out there, or is it only happening in here? When you're studying this subject, there's no out there and in here. That veil goes away. That's the whole point. The whole point of the exercise is to pierce that veil, what the anthropologists call this liminal space, right? This space between this world and the next. You're broaching that. You're going through that door. That's the whole point. So when I go through that door, are things happening to me in my mind only? Or are they happening in reality, in the real world? Or is the real world some kind of an imaginary? Thank you very much. Imaginary. I'm talking faster than I can formulate the words. Is it some kind of an imaginary place, right? So these are the questions that this teaches you when you start to work with it. If you don't work with it, it's easy to sit back and say, well, this guy was just crazy. It all happened in his head. It all happened in his mind, right? It's easy to say that. The people that you mentioned that study Kabbalah and they go kind of crazy, people study they study ceremonial magic and it happens to them. Or they take too much DMT and it happens to them. Or all kinds of things can happen, right? Enochian can do this. Because Enochian specifically says, talk to us in our language. Here's our language.
Let's introduce why we're talking specifically about Enochian. I'll just kind of lay the framework. So a month or two ago, Matt Brown, who's a whistleblower on Immaculate Constellation, was the program. He posted something on Twitter. It was a bit of an enigmatic post where he took I don't know if it's called a cipher ring or something like that, but it was, I think, a cipher that John Dee had set up in order to get the names of 7 angels, but there was the name of an 8th hidden angel called a Boramon. But anyway, he posted a screenshot from a podcast or YouTube channel called Lifting the Lamp. Lifting the Lamp is run by someone who calls himself Frater Eleutheria or something like that. I'm going to be interviewing him next week. Hopefully, that continues to go through. But what that ring was Enochian, right? It was based on Enochian symbols. And Enochian was developed by John Dee had alleged contact with what he called angels, I guess. Who knows what they were. But the interesting part that fascinated me about that, though, is why is an intelligence officer posting a screenshot from a YouTube channel that follows the occult, but only it's got like 20,000 subscribers? That's probably a reason for that too. Maybe it's suppressed. But what do you make of all that? And this is why we're talking about Enochian. Sorry to kind of take you all the
but that's a good reason.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh yeah, I don't know where to begin. But I mean, it's a good way to bring it up. But Enochian it's not only in this particular instance that you're talking about. Jack Parsons was using Enochian back in 1945, 46, when he was doing his rituals out in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, the Enochian calls, this is like standard Golden Dawn, AA, OTO kind of, not OTO so much, but pretty much the ritual magic people. The Enochian is like the holy grail for some people because what it is, it represents not just a magical method. There's an entire language, its own independent language that is called angelic language, or the Enochian language. Has its own alphabet, its own letters. It has its entirely own vocabulary. It has its own grammar. And back in the day when we were looking at Enochian really heavily, back in late 70s, I guess, early 80s, we were talking to people who were specialized in linguistics, and they said nobody can invent a language. No one
By the way, when you say we, who do you mean?
Folks, people,
Okay.
friends,
Okay.
relatives.
Okay.
No, not relatives, really. Don't want to bring them into this. People that I was working with, that I was talking to in the occult circles, right? So I knew a lot of occult people back in the 70s. I knew people in the AA, the OTO, in the Wicca movements, for instance, the pagan movements. That was neo-paganism was very big. And Marvel Comics people. We knew like everybody. Tolkien people, Renaissance fair people. So we had in New York City, which is where I'm from, we had this extensive sort of extended family of people that all knew each other. We all hung out together in one or two bars that were no longer around. But the Bells of Hell, for instance, in Greenwich Village, that was the name of the place. We didn't name it that way. It was an English bar, an English pub, basically. And so we had just an enormous number of people from all different walks of life, but they were all very invested, very involved in studying this phenomenon, some more than others, some very serious. Some were just taking it like this is a fun thing to do, Renaissance fair types, on one hand, and then you had the very serious ceremonial magicians on the other, but everybody hung out. It's kind of hard to describe that today. Nobody believes it. But in those days, it was normal. Or maybe it's because it was New York and that's normal in New York. But studying Enochian then became a thing because we started to understand, we started to hear from linguists that no one person can invent a language. That's considered to be impossible. You need a group of people to do it. You need different perspectives. You need all of this. You just can't sit there and do it. Maybe today
but Tolkien did it. Tolkien did it, right? Or I guess.
Kinda. Yeah, but he was basing it on something, right? Tolkien was basing it on
100%.
So he had that kind of a background where he could sort of tinker with it and come up with Silmarillion.
So you're saying Enochian's like a de novo language, just like
out of nowhere. Okay. It's got no relationship to anything else, right? So there's no Hebrew equivalence. There's no Anglo-Saxon equivalence that we can find. No Latin in there. It's just all its own thing, right? It's completely sui generis. And they were given this language in a very painstaking way. This is the fascinating part, because nobody today had the patience to go through this. And what happened is there was a show stone, like a crystal ball. An angel would show up, and there would be a grid of squares that there's two people involved. Dee, Dr. Dee is the guy doing the conjurations. Edward Kelly, his assistant, is the seer. He's actually the psychic who's able to see images in the crystal ball and see the angel, and the angel will point to letters. And then Kelly had to write the letters in the proper squares on these huge grids, right? And the angel would do it backwards. So you wouldn't accidentally say some of these names out loud and then conjure something. The language was considered that powerful, and correct pronunciation of it was considered enough to open the doors of consciousness completely. So this was a painstaking exercise that went on for months, right? If you look at the Enochian tablets, and there's the ones that you're familiar with are just the tip of the iceberg. There's hundreds and hundreds more tablets, all different languages, letters, all different combinations, all different designs. They're all for different purposes. We don't even know half of what that's supposed to mean. And there's the idea that it's a mathematical matrix, right? This is what's so fascinating. This is a mathematical attempt to bridge between math and language. I mean, this is far-reaching advanced stuff, even for today, right? To create a bridge between our mathematical language and our verbal language. Nobody can do it. If you've gone to math courses in college, you'll know that's not possible, right? You're writing equations on the board. You have to speak equation. You can't just say what this means. Not when you get to advanced calculus, and not when you get into theoretical physics. You might as well just throw your pencil away, because you're not going to be able to figure out unless you're really in that system, right? And you know already what those equations mean, and you know what all of that means. There's no English language way to easily describe a mathematical equation. The equation speaks for itself. In Enochian, they're trying to bridge that gap in a sense. It was like a rudimentary attempt. They're saying there's squares, there's matrices. We're filling the matrices with letters. In Kabbalah, those letters are also numbers, which means now you're looking at a numerical matrix, not just a linguistic one. So in Kabbalah, they did that already. Each letter is a number, every number is a letter. You can create equations, and the equations can say words, right? So it's operating on your linguistic side of your brain and on your numerical side of your brain sort of simultaneously. And it causes that cortical fusion in the middle.
Corpus callosum, yeah.
The corpus callosum, and something happens, right? Something gets created. You see something. It's another way of looking at reality, another way of looking at the universe. So yes, they believed that they were using that to conjure angels. The angels would show up and then speak to them and give them information that they wanted. So this was part of what Enochian is. Enochian is it requires a very strenuous application of your mental resources to do it. You have to create those tablets just the way they're supposed to be. It's really hard to do that without making mistakes. You have to make the basic tablets and then follow the basic instructions and practice the Enochian language, practice pronouncing it. There's a problem. No one tells you how to pronounce it. Mm-hmm. So the Golden Dawn kind of thought, well, just pronounce the letters. We know how the letters themselves are pronounced. Let's do it that way. So instead of saying cat, we'll just say C-A-T. And we'll do it from there. It's very ponderous. It's very slow going. And it's not really intuitive. So then others have tried to say, well, we know how the letters are pronounced, each letter name. Let's try to figure out the pronunciation based on that. And they've come up with various ways of doing that. But you're learning a new language, right? You're learning a new language as well as all the magical stuff that goes along with it. So when he posted that, and he posted the diagram, right? The cryptography of it, right?
Yep.
He's saying something. He's saying that this is the doorway, right? This is the way to go, right? He's trying to make that kind of a statement, which is what we've been saying all along in Secret Machine.
He being Matt Brown.
He being Matt Brown, right?
Yeah.
Not Frater Eleftheri. I think he was just doing his thing, right? He was explaining the Enochian system. But then this guy came and said, okay, it's like a Collins elite thing, to go back to that old idea, right? There's a group that's operating, trying to investigate how do we use ritual magic to communicate with the phenomenon. How does this work? How do we do it? You know, Dee and Kelly, they had this elaborate system. And you know how people love these elaborate systems. They think if it's an elaborate system, it must be true, right?
Yeah, the more elaborate, the more legit it is, right?
Right, exactly. So they're going to use that. Enochian's going to be the obvious thing. But Enochian is very tricky. It's a very tricky practice. There was a group out in California in the 60s and 70s, if I remember correctly, that really went all out in studying the Enochian system, and they really dissected it and were performing rituals and everything else, and they encountered all sorts of, again, very strange phenomenon. In one case, I think their house burned down. So stuff like that would happen.
It happened to Parsons too, right? His house blew up.
Well, basically. He blew up, yeah, right.
Yeah, because he was working with, it's not like it just randomly burned down. He was working with explosives, right?
We believe, yes. Right, but it turns out he had a lot of enemies in the Pasadena Police Department, so who knows, right? He was planning to leave the country that day. He was on his way out to Mexico. He was packed up and ready to go. And they were going to, I think, San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And I guess somebody didn't want him to leave. There's also other rumors, Theodore
he's working as an intelligence agent for Israel.
Possibly.
Not intelligence, but
not intelligence,
supplying them with their rocketry program, helping out with that. Yeah. So,
which was Theodore von Karman introducing him to the Israelis. He was the middleman in that operation, right? But U.S. intelligence didn't think too highly of that idea that you would give rocket technology to the Israelis. So there was that problem, So there were a number of issues with Parsons. Parsons Parsons lost his security clearance twice. Mostly because of his occult practices, but also because he was believed to be stealing documents, which are the documents he wrote. So,
right.
The usual thing. Anyway, to get back to it, so Parsons was using Enochian, and look at all the things that happened to Parsons. One after the other. Hubbard stealing his money, stealing his girlfriend, right? Basically creating Scientology, Dianetics anyway, on the back of Parsons' own work, using his money and his sources, and claiming later that he knew Crowley personally. Hubbard never met Crowley. Crowley died in 1947, but Hubbard is there saying, oh, we used to hang out and have these long talks, right? He would say that during his Dianetics phase. When he lost Dianetics because of a lawsuit and founded Scientology, he stopped talking about Crowley at that point. So there's a lot of fallout from this kind of stuff. And Enochian is one of them. Most people involved with Enochian may not come across anything at all. They're not doing it right. It requires a lot of dedication to make that system work the right way, to really get a handle on it. But I think what Matt Brown was doing was he was just throwing some breadcrumbs out there. You know, I have here somewhere, there's been a lot of books on, you probably can't see it well, in reverse image, right?
The Enochian
Enochian evocation of
Evocation
of John Dee. This is by Jeffrey James, edited and translated. This is by a friend, Joseph Peterson. It's the John Dee's 5 Books of Mystery. There's a lot of John Dee material out there, not just the books that you think of when you think of Enochian, which is that big thing of Merrick Casaubon, A True and Faithful Relation of What Transpired with Dr. Dee and Some Spirits, I think is the long title. That's the standard book that people refer to. It has all the tablets in there for the major big square, which is composed of 4 smaller squares and a cross in the middle. It's a long, involved process. Some people claim that some of the copying was wrong, and I think they're right. In some cases, some of these things were copied the wrong way. So there have been corrections to the Dee material over time, but it's still a very powerful tool if you have the dedication and the will to go through and learn it, and to do it step by step and do it slowly. As I mentioned in another interview we did, you can't rush into this stuff because you don't know what's waiting for you. What you talked about as far as things happening to people, when they get involved with this, a lot of that's because of what's inside their own brains, their own consciousness, their own memories. That's why Israel Regardie, a member of the Golden Dawn, very famous guy, published the Golden Dawn rituals. He insisted that before you get involved in any kind of esoteric work, occultism in general, go through a couple of years of psychotherapy first, right? Figure out what's in there that's going to cause you trouble later on. If you have unresolved issues that are kind of just below the surface, you have to deal with those first, because they will come out and really give you a problem later on.
Is this because the phenomenon is reflexive?
Or to use that,
I guess.
Reflective, you could use that word. You're going into the darkness. You're going into the unknown. And what is unknown to us personally is the things that we've been suppressing all this time, we're not consciously aware of. You're becoming consciously aware of unconscious material. And that's always dangerous, right? So that's why all of these mystical societies, not just mystical religious societies in Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, or Buddhism in India, Hinduism in general, there's all kinds of procedures that you do to build up the strength of your psychic body. Let's say you build up your powers, you build up your strength, you see what's in there, you test yourself physically, you test yourself mentally and psychologically. If you're testing yourself that much, things will show up. Things will try to trip you up. You'll suddenly encounter things that you didn't realize were there. People who exercise a lot say, I developed muscles in places I didn't know I had muscles. It's the same thing dealing with the unconscious mind. You will find things you didn't know were there in the unconscious mind. It's a kind of self-analysis that takes place, and it's ongoing throughout your life. Once you start this process, it's going to keep popping up because you've opened the door, right? So that's a word of warning as well. There are things that happen in a good way. When I was writing Sinister Forces, I was writing it. I had compiled all the information over 20, 25 years, but I started really writing it while I was living in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Now, Kuala Lumpur in the 1990s was not a place that you had a lot of esoteric libraries, right? You didn't have access to, Samuel Weiser's or something. It was just, for those who know, they didn't exist. And I wasn't looking for anything, right? I was doing my research. I was happy with what I had, but I would go for a walk and I would go down streets I had never been before, just going and going, just thinking and going. And I would come across book-stalls, and down weird side streets full of dust, right? And there would be books on these little wire racks that were exactly the chapters I was working on, right? Speaking exactly to that. So I found 2 or 3 very academic texts on the Salem witchcraft trials, which showed up just as I was writing that chapter. And then later on, another time, I found books on Charles Manson, again, very academic treatises on the Manson phenomenon, right? Little paperbacks full of dust stuck in places you wouldn't expect. And there they were, right? For like $4 or $5 or less. And everything that I would use to bolster my research on that particular chapter. These things would happen. This is a good way of things happening, right? Bad things can happen as well. You can have very strange dreams, very strange nightmares. Things can happen where you, for at least briefly, you're not aware if you're awake or dreaming, right? Not exactly lucid dreaming, just a mental state that's hard to define otherwise. But if you're used to ritual magic, becomes familiar, right? So things like that will take place. You automatically start these things in operation. Not to be afraid of it, but if you've already prepared yourself well, you can deal with these things as they come up. The good and the bad. You'll deal with them. They won't surprise you. They won't be a source of consternation. You'll just be happy dealing with it because it's there. It's part of your reality. It's part of something you should know. So and once you know it, it's gone. Its threat profile has decreased enormously, let's say, to use military jargon, right? So it's no longer a threat. Once this horrible threatening thing happens and you experience it, basically that's it. It's over, right? So you don't have to worry about it anymore. So these are things that you tell people if they're looking at getting involved in any field like this. But at the same time, why would governments want to be involved in it, right?
Right. And why would governments not want the population to get involved in it?
Well, not want the population to get involved for the reasons I'm telling you. Who teaches this stuff, right? Who's going to sit there and be responsible for the emotional and psychological fallout that may incur if you get a bunch of basically either unstable people or people who don't know they're unstable or have the potential to be unstable getting involved in this process, right? So the mystery schools are just basically not there anymore, So now we're all on our own, right? We have Google, so we're going to Google initiate ourselves, and this is a problem right there in one area. The government wants it because it knows, as they knew back in 1952, they know that there is a connection between this phenomenon and the paranormal. As Tien knew when he went to China and jump-started both the space program and their paranormal research, that there's a connection between the two. They know this. Russia knew it. The KGB investigated paranormal phenomenon intensively. Right? Everybody knew there was a connection here. Everybody still knows it. Now you're going to have a lot of pushback from people saying this is satanic, this is demonic, it's evil, it's from the devil, all this other stuff. Well, that is one particular ideological position to take. And I'm not going to argue anybody's religion with them. All I'm going to say is I think we're getting past that now. I think we've outgrown that idea. We're now, even in academia, even recently in academia, people are writing essays saying, we made a mistake. We put esotericism outside of religion. We made it kind of a subculture. We put it outside of human experience in general. We demonized it, basically. We called it something else. We got to get back to the part where this is an integral part of the human experience. What we're talking about, esotericism, occultism, is an integral part of being human. It's there. We all have ghost stories. We all have those moments when we thought of someone and the phone rang. We all have these little bits and pieces of it. And then we look at something like the Kennedy assassination and we see it's all over it, right? Mm-hmm. So then we know that there is something integral to our consciousness. We've just been repressing it. We've been putting it on the side. We're refusing to look at it. But this could be that part of the elephant that we have to grasp now to understand what the whole elephant looks like. It's that missing piece of reality. And I think it's necessary, and it's not spooky unless you're easily spooked, and it's not dangerous unless you're doing this in a dangerous way. You can do anything dangerously, drive a car dangerously, take DMT dangerously, you can drink alcohol dangerously. There's all kinds of things you can do dangerously. This is one of them, right? But if you take it slow, you take it easy, one step at a time, it's not that dangerous. You will encounter something and you'll stop and you'll say, okay, what does this mean? And if you follow these basic instructions, you'll find in a lot of books, right? A friend of mine, Marco Visconti, wrote a book on this particular process from the point of view of the Aleister Crowley people, how they look at it. So he's someone to look at, to talk to about it, because he can understand the process also, having dealt with people and dealt with classes and people who are earnestly desiring to know how this works. And I've helped cooperate with him in one or two classes teaching about the celestial ascent process, which to me is very fascinating. It's very ancient. It goes back around the world. Everyone's done a version of this. And I find this is like an easy way to introduce people to the process, to rising on the planes, let's say. So it was covered in Jewish mysticism, and it's been covered in Egyptian and in Sumerian and everywhere, just basically everywhere in Asia, everywhere in India. This is a process that has a strong pedigree. So we talk about that. That's one way of doing it. It's part of human culture. It doesn't matter what race you are, ethnicity, it's part of the culture in general. It's there. It's part of what we are as humans. So I think it's valuable. It's not scary unless you make it scary, unless you fall for the Hollywood tropes, and the devil's rising out of the ground and all the other stuff. If you fall for that sort of thing, yeah, it can be scary if that's where your head is. Crowley once said magic is a mirror in which who sees muck is muck, right? So if you're looking in the mirror and you see something horrible, maybe you got to work on yourself a little bit. So that's the G-rated version of that story.
So going back to this Matt Brown thing. So Frater Eleutheria, obviously is called a stage name, pseudonym, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you go back and watch his videos about this dial that he talks about, he claims to have summoned, because there's I guess when you speak the name of particular entities, there's some element of ceremonial magic that I'm completely butchering right now, but he claims to have summoned this angel, which is basically the angel of destruction. He claims to have been the first to have ever done it. I can't, who knows? Because it was like a hidden name in the cipher. And then sometime in the same period, these red heifers were born in Israel.
Right.
Can you unpack any of that for me? Try to understand it. Let's just assume it's true. We don't even know if it's true, right? But assume it's real. Is that correlation, causation? What does that mean?
Well, as you know, the old story is correlation is not causation, but
sometimes it does not imply. It doesn't mean it's not, right? Sometimes.
Right. It doesn't mean it's not. No. Yeah. I don't understand the connection myself between the red heifers and the demon of destruction, unless he's trying to make a political point.
Well, Revelation, book of Revelation, kind of apocalypse.
I
apocalypse, not in terms of revealing, not necessarily end of the world.
Yeah. The problem is that Revelation is a very specific text to a very specific time and place with very specific actors. When you overinterpret Revelation, man, you can go anywhere with that, okay? And you can back read from Revelation into the Bible and read all kinds of stuff that was never in the Bible, but Revelation is like your lens for understanding the Bible. The red heifers, that's an Old Testament thing, right? And to use Revelation and the demon of destruction to try to understand the red heifer thing is, again, reading back from, a first century CE guy having this experience and talking about very specific places and individuals and times, and then back reading it into something more ancient. I don't know if I really want to go there. I'll probably have to go and look at, now that you've done it, I have to go back and I'll watch this video to see really how he's making that connection. But a word, however, about the process.
Also, if you have questions this week that you want to send me to ask him, I will absolutely. And I'll say, Peter Levenda had this question.
Sure.
What do you think? Yeah.
No worries. What people don't understand about magic ritual is that it's really a technology. Mm-hmm. And it's a technology of consciousness because it works on what we understand how the brain works. So a magical ritual is a kind of sensory deprivation chamber. It should be set up that way. That's what you're talking about. So, if you study sort of, let's say, Golden Dawn style magic, they were very good for all of this, by the way. I don't knock them at all. They knew what they were doing to that extent. They understood how to make these things work. For instance, the example they always use is one of the spirits of Mars, Barzabel, right? And that's a name that's drawn on the magic square of Mars. Again, we're going to the matrices. You have a square. It's a 5x5 square, so it's 25 cells. Each cell has a number in it, and each number equals a Hebrew letter. So you take the name of the spirit, you draw it on this matrix, you connect the letters, and that symbol means Barzabel, means that particular spirit. Okay, so you have that worked out. It's a spirit connected with Mars. Mars is the red planet. Therefore, everything should be red, right? All of the accoutrements should be red. There should be red candles, for instance. There should be 5 of them because Mars being the 5th in this Kabbalistic scheme of things, the 5th sphere. So you're trying to re-emphasize all these associations with Mars and get rid of anything that is not Mars, right? So no gold, no purple, no black, no whatever. Everything has to be Martian in quality. So when you open your eyes, all you do is you see Mars, the Mars energy, let's call it. The incense should be that sacred to Mars. So dragon's blood incense is quite often used. So that smell now is associated in your mind with Mars and with the color red and with the number 5. So you're doing all of these things in a coordinated way, and then you're invoking the spirit of Mars to appear in the circle. Only Mars could appear if you've done everything right, because you've created a controlled sensory deprivation experiment in which the senses, everything that's extraneous to your project is gone. So your senses can only see what you have created for it. Nothing else. Your senses will not see something that is not appropriate to that particular ritual. That's the whole purpose of this. The incantations, the words, the name itself, the numbers, all of these are connected in one thing. So if you're doing Enochian, it's the same basic thing applies. Dee and Kelly left some basic instructions for how these things should be done, how you set up the altar, how you set up the tablets, and all of these things, and the sigils, the decoding ring, you might call it. All of these things are discussed at some length in some places and not at all in others. So it's up to you to figure out how a lot of this works. They used a kind of crystal ball, a show stone, as they called it. You'll also find they had an obsidian plate, which is black. It came from a volcano in Mexico. So that they sometimes used as well. So you would see in this device the images that you're looking for. So in some cases, they would use the crystal ball as the medium for the spirit of, in this case, let's say Mars, to appear and to answer your questions and to do whatever you had in mind for the spirit of Mars. This goes the same for everything. When Crowley was in North Africa using Enochian to open up each key of the Enochian keys from text to lil, as they say, from the first to the last, he would use a certain particular process. He would do it over and over again. He had his method of doing it, and every time he did it, it would put him in that mental state. He had a specific tool that he used. He had a partner that he used, and he would get into this particular state, and he would use the calls. He would speak Enochian, in other words, chant out this Enochian call, and then wait for what would happen. So he was trying to push everything else out that was not the key and not the ether being the level, the spiritual level that he was trying to approach. So this is what the Enochian system is about. It can be extremely dangerous. It was dangerous for Crowley. Crowley, in attempting to cross the abyss, that's another long discussion. We don't have time for it.
Karanzan.
Karanzan, yes, the demon of the abyss. Now you've invoked him. Now we're going to get problems now. So now you have Karanzan.
Did I seriously, by saying his name, it's not...
You're not supposed to say it without, burning incense or, I'm kidding. You'll be fine. You're all right. Don't worry. But anyway, I try not to pronounce it just because God knows what'll happen. But yeah, he's the demon of the abyss. He's the person that you have to confront. And the thing is, it's a demon of nonsense, basically. The abyss is a place where nothing means anything, where there's a lot of stuff, but nothing is connected. And because we have a tendency to force meaning, we go insane because we're trying to see meaning where there is no meaning, where there's deliberately no meaning. We've entered a meaningless zone, but we're surrounded by stuff. That's a very deep philosophical thing, if you think about it. Just think about imagining yourself in a place where you're surrounded by all kinds of objects, but nothing actually means anything, and you're trying to force meaning into something. Isn't that life itself? Right?
Yeah.
But the abyss sharpens that to the point where you see the futility, you see the stupidity of it. You see the fact that you've reached a point where the only person The only part of you that's trying to force meaning is the ego, right? Because your ego depends upon your relationship to meaning. Your ego depends on that. If your ego has no meaning, you've entered samadhi, you've entered nirvana, maybe. You're in a place where meaning is irrelevant, right? You've entered pure bliss. We don't talk about meaning and bliss in the same sentence, right? So, anyway, this is probably gone far out from what you wanted to ask me. But
no, this is that I'm enthralled by everything you say, despite my. I'm getting all the answers right, but I'm saying the answers when they shouldn't be said sometimes.
That's okay. Right? That's cool. That's fine. Probably your audience is doing the same. Probably they're putting these things together as they're listening too, which I hope they are. I hope they're doing. I hope I'm not saying anything too weird. I'm just trying to lay out what this process is like, because there's been so much mystification over it and so much Hollywoodization over it that we don't know what it is anymore. But it's a technology. And I went to college in my 50s with the understanding that I was researching a spiritual technology, that this is what this is. My studying religious studies was an attempt to see how this technology works in different parts of the world, different cultures. Anthropologically speaking, the anthropologists have one way of looking at it, or they used to. Now they've opened up a little bit, and they're starting to realize that the esoteric part may be the central part, and that religion is what's around it. Religion is the costume that esotericism wears when it goes out, in public. So this may be what we're talking about here. I've written in another place that religions are basically, it's the area of the failed magician, right? If I can't get past the abyss, I'm going to sit back and create a religion to give me the kind of validation that I need that I'm not getting from the magical practice. Now, that's kind of harsh where religion is concerned.
It's like the safe version, or the version of the esoterica for the masses, right?
Right. Except now, can any of us afford to be part of the masses anymore, right? The masses are the target, right, of what's going on. And I don't think we can afford to remain comfortable as part of the masses. We should pursue our own path as quickly as we can, as honestly as we can, and as safely as we can, because being part of the masses is probably not the safest thing to be. Not anywhere, not in the United States, not anywhere else. Being part of the masses is, like I say, is the target. So I think we should try to step out of that comfort zone and maybe take a chance, dip our toes in something and see where it leads us.
With that as your advice, what would be the first step for people who are we're not just talking ceremonial magic, but we're talking just taking the first step on the path to enlightenment, to kind of, are there events that kind of happen? I've told you about the owl on the fence and all that weird. And I've shown you the picture and like things like that. How do we take events like that? Maybe it's meaningless, but what if it's not? What are kind of next steps for people who are just interested in learning the deeper mysteries of reality, or at least delving into those?
I think the best thing anybody can do who's listening to this right now and who's not done this yet, this is going to sound stupid. Keep a diary. You've got to write these things down. The reason is you're going to forget them and you're going to want to remember them later. So you write down the date, very precisely, month, day, and year, the time, if possible, when something like this happens. And I know you won't be able to have a pen and paper with you or a device with you at all times. Well, you'll have a device with you at all times, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But you'll have some way to write this down and compile it. It's better if you handwrite it because it's a visceral thing. You involve the body in doing this, but maybe using a device is also visceral. I don't know. I seem to prefer writing these things down manually, but write them down. Keep a book of this. Maybe it's better to have a hard copy than it is to have a digital one, because someone could capture your digital copy, or you could lose it more easily than maybe a hard copy. It's beside the point. The idea is to write down these events, write down dreams. When you wake up, write down strange things that happen, anything strange that happens, a strange thought that occurs to you. Just write it down, just a sentence or two. It doesn't have to be elaborate. A year from now, go back and look at what you've written, and you will be amazed And it will actually show you the path that you were on that you couldn't see at the time. You're going to see little pathways, little arrows marked out for you. And you weren't aware at the time because you just thought it was life as usual. But when you go back and look at it, you'll think, oh my God, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened a month later. This is so important to do, because once you do that, you're getting a handle on who you are, what your path is, what you're doing, where you're going. But also, you may give you some hints as to what you have to work on, as to things that are holding you back, right? And as I said before, a little psychotherapy before you start something like this is not a bad idea. But who among us, right, can easily afford a year or two of psychotherapy, right? But there's things you can do. There's places you can go. There's meditation courses you can take, even online courses, even stuff that's free that you can take to begin to develop that ability to look inside yourself and to deal with the things that come up that may be negative. Something negative comes up, you write it down, right? It's valuable information. It's data. Like every scientist, an experiment that fails teaches you as much as an experiment that succeeds. You need that data. Don't be ideological about your data. Data is data. It has no good or bad in it. It's just data. Copy it down. Keep a track of it. You will find it really valuable later. That diary is the first thing that you should do. And after a year, let's have a talk again, right? Let's see if any of your people have done that and have anything to share. And then we can go over it and talk about it a year from now.
All right, Peter. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you, and I learn so much every time. You're, I think, probably one of the best researchers in the world on these topics, I think. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.